Hello, my name is Nancy Hopkin. I'm with eatingdisordershelp.com. I was at a junior high last week speaking to a group of students, and we were talking about the signs and symptoms of eating disorders, what they knew. We were talking about how weird the behavior was, and we even got into why anybody would want to throw up, or why would anybody want to starve themselves. Why does anybody need to be so thin, or need to be so sick, or risk their body in such a way? I noticed that there was a girl in the classroom who was dressed in such a way that made me a little bit concerned for her. I felt like she was trying to make a statement, trying to find herself. And indeed, after the class, she is the one that came up to me and said, "How do you know if you might be prone to having an eating disorder?" And I said, "How do you feel when you come to class? How do you feel when you get up in the morning? Do you feel kind of anxious, or do you feel depressed?" And she said, "Well, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, do you feel a little nervous about coming to school each day? Do you feel like you're wondering who's going to be your friend that day and who isn't? Or what the real questions are going to be on the test? A lot of anxiety, nervousness, butterflies in your stomach, kind of wondering what's going to jump out at you." And she says, "Yeah, I feel that way." And I said, "Do you feel that way, once in a while? Because that is sort of a junior high thing to feel. Or do you feel that kind of on a constant basis every day?" She says, I feel that every day." And I said, "Has anything unusual happened in the last few years?" And she said, "My mother died last year." I thought, oh, that's pretty significant. Okay, and I said, "Have you ever been to a counselor to talk about that?" And she said, "No." And I envisioned this poor dad who was probably in terrible grief about the loss of his wife. And after he sort of got over that, then he's still left with these children. And I don't know how many kids there were in the family, but from where we live, typically the families are pretty big. And so he's got all these children with all these needs, and he's got to feed them and clothe them and take of their emotional and their spiritual and their emotional needs, getting their homework done, making sure the house is in a way that they can find things, and going to work on top of that. It's a tremendous burden, a tremendous load. And my heart just went out to both he and his daughter. So I put my arm around her and I gave her a squeeze, and I said, "You probably ought to go talk to your dad and see if there's any way that you can go see a counselor, because you need to resolve these feelings. They're still brewing inside of you, and you haven't quite resolved them. You haven't gotten through them yet." And she sort of started to cry, and she said, "Okay, I'll do that." And it occurred to me that all of us, I don't think there's a human being alive that hasn't had some kind of trauma in their life. At least nobody over 2 years old. And sometimes we don't know who we can turn to. But we need to make sure, at least for the purposes of this video, that our children have a place to come. So my big question for you today is, when is that time that you have set aside each day for each one of your children that is totally theirs? And it may only be 5 minutes, but every child needs a time that's their own. And when is the time that you set aside for each of your children, and what kinds of things do you talk about? Thanks for joining me. If you have any more issues, or if you'd like to know more about eating disorders, please go to www.eatingdisordershelp.com, or also see me on my Facebook page. Thank you.